So, the full definition of domestic violence is when an abuser is utilizing abusive tactics to maintain and to gain power and control over their victims. And this could include emotional abuse, psychological abuse, financial abuse, which is not talked about enough. And a lot of times people have been in abusive relationships where it's never gotten physical. They dealt with mostly the psychological, which is just as bad. And the psychological abuse can lead to physical and or sexual abuse as well.
We're so excited to welcome Teresa to the Modern Therapy Podcast. Teresa has dedicated her career to supporting survivors of domestic violence and sexual violence through counseling, advocacy, prevention education, crisis intervention, and community support services. Through her work, Teresa helps individuals and families navigate some of the most difficult and traumatic experiences while also educating the community on healthy relationships, safety, empowerment, and healing. Today, we're diving into the signs of abuse that people often miss, from emotional abuse and coercive control to manipulation, isolation, and trauma bonding. We'll also talk about why abusive relationships can be so difficult to leave, how trauma impacts mental health, and how friends, family members, therapists, and communities can better support survivors in a compassionate and informed way. Let's dive in.
So we are so excited to have Teresa here today.
Thank you.
We are talking about domestic violence. You have been in the field for a while, so you have a lot of expertise on this.
Yes.
Can you share a little bit about what your background is and how you got into this work?
Okay, so I'm a licensed professional counselor, and I started working in the mental health field. It's been a while, since like 2013, but then I graduated with my master's back in early 2016, and then I started working in psychiatric facilities, intensive outpatient programs, the private practices, and then I started to draw more of my attention into working with survivors of abuse. And that was in 2018. That's when I started to take that work more seriously. And once I started serving that population, I stayed. I didn't go anywhere else. That was my niche. I see that there's a great need of not just counseling, but there's a great need of guidance, support, and empowerment for survivors of abuse all around, right? And I do feel like there's such a gap in literature, or there's such a gap or lack of understanding in our society when it comes to working with survivors of domestic violence. I feel like it's still very much stigmatized. I mean, we've come a long way over the years, but it's still very, very much stigmatized. And I always like to talk about it to bring more awareness to it. It is a touchy subject. It really, really is, but it has to be talked about.
Absolutely. And even in the therapy world, there's a lot of hesitation from providers to even treat survivors sometimes, because they think that they don't know how to help them sometimes. They're scared to do the wrong thing. They're scared to get them in potentially a more dangerous situation.
Yes.
Yeah, I think there's a physical component that isn't there in a lot of other areas of care.
You're right.
Yeah.
You're right. And, I get a lot of referrals from private practices or even intensive outpatient programs from hospitals. Why? Because the therapist will probably say, I don't have much experience working with survivors of abuse, so I'm going to send them your way. No problem, please send them away. I like how a lot of therapists like to work together and make referrals to people when it comes to their area of expertise. And this is one area where definitely I'm an expert in it.
Yeah.
So when people hear the term abuse, I think immediately the thought goes to the physical component of abuse, but there's also a huge mental, emotional component of abuse that often gets kind of put to the side. Can you talk through some of the differences and kind of what that looks like?
Absolutely. I think that's a fabulous question, because you're right. When people hear the word domestic violence, they hear the word violence, they automatically think of physical. Okay. So sometimes I do like to say domestic abuse, but hopefully people start thinking it's not just physical. So the full definition of domestic violence is when an abuser is utilizing abusive tactics to maintain and to gain power and control over their victims, right? And this could include emotional abuse, psychological abuse, financial abuse, which is not talked about enough. And a lot of times people have been in abusive relationships where it's never gotten physical. They dealt with mostly the psychological, which is just as bad. And the psychological abuse can lead to physical and or sexual abuse as well. But the other thing when we look at domestic violence, people immediately think of intimate partner violence, right? So there's the similar definition. The difference is that domestic violence is within any relationships, which means it can happen within family members as well. It can happen at a workplace as well. It can happen among friends. And then there's intimate partner violence, where the domestic violence or the abuse is happening between partners in an intimate relationship.
Yeah. Are you finding that it's harder for people to recognize when the other types of abuse are happening, right? Because physical, but the financial, can you walk through that a little bit? Because that probably happens slowly over time, right?
It does happen slowly over time, but it also depends on the dynamic. And a lot of people don't recognize that they're going through it.
Yeah.
Right? Because there's different avenues to it. For example, somebody might be in an abusive relationship where the abuser probably won't allow them to work. Right? And it can either happen either or. They might demand it, or they might kind of sugarcoat it. I'll take care of you. I don't need you to, don't worry about working. You can stay home. You can relax. You can do this. You can do that. And the victim in the relationship is probably thinking like, oh, that's great, but without realizing that this is a slow tactic to maintain some sort of power and control over them, to slowly but surely take away their freedom, right? And other areas I've seen, like when the victim is working, but they have to give the abuser the money, right? The abuser has access to the money. Other things I've seen is like, let's say the abuser is in control of the finances, but the victim has no idea what's going on with the finances. Now, let's say if they were in a marriage and a divorce was happening, the victim, who then becomes the survivor, right? They start to learn a lot of stuff, a lot about the money that was hidden from them, right? And also, I just want to tie in the immigration population as well. I think that's so important to tie in. Based on their immigration status, they definitely go through a lot of financial abuse, especially when they're coming from another country. They may not know the ins and out of the United States. They don't know their legal rights. They don't know the laws, especially if they don't have a working visa, right? And they definitely go through an increased risk of dealing with financial economic abuse as well.
Yeah, it's almost like the way that it's set up for them to come here. It's you think about it, you're like, well, you can't always work, right? You can't always get a driver's license at first. Like, there's so many things that you're like, it does make them a very vulnerable population because of that.
It definitely does. I mean, this area, I can go deep in it. There's so many different tactics. Credit card use, when credit cards are being opened in their names and stuff like that. I've seen that happen a lot.
Yeah. How often are you seeing it being brought to light while they're still in the relationship versus, like you were saying before, they're leaving the relationship and now they're like, oh my gosh, where did all the money go? Or there's all this debt that I didn't know about.
I think a lot of times when I'm working with survivors is when they would tell me that they started to do their own research on what they were going through. Because a lot of times they don't know the terminology, because there's a lot of terminology that comes into this, into domestic violence and tactics of an abuser. So a lot of times when they do their own research, or maybe they have a trusted family member or friend that's educating them on it, or when they start coming into therapy and then I provide them the education on it, and that's when, it starts to sink in that they were actually going through some financial economic abuse as well, on top of everything else.
Yeah.
So a lot of it comes with education.
Yeah. Can we talk a little bit about the archetype of an abuser and kind of like what that looks like? Because you had mentioned that it's mainly about like power and control. In your experience in the work that you've done, what are some common traits that you've seen among that kind of like abuser archetype?
Oh, what are some common traits? Oh, see, my mind is racing because there's so many. I think it's so important to give like a background on how so much research was done back in the day, and there was more awareness brought up into domestic violence. So, have you ever heard of the cycle of violence?
Yes.
Okay, so that was created by Lenore Walker back in 1979. Through her research, what she was looking into was, what is this cycle that's happening within the relationship, right? That the victim feels stuck in that cycle. And through her research, and of course she used survivors of domestic violence for her research. So through her research, she identified 3 areas. And it's, tension building, acute explosion, and then the honeymoon stage. So, the tension building, it's when the victim might start to notice that the abuser is becoming a bit more tense. You know, they find themselves walking around eggshells because they know something's going to happen. The abuser starts to be a bit more aggressive, right? And then the victim try to fawn with them, right? They try to reason with them because they want to avoid that explosion from happening, but it does happen. That's the next stage, the acute explosion stage. And in that stage, that's when the victim decides, like, maybe I should go to the police. Maybe I should go to a trusted friend, a family member. Maybe I need to leave. If they're married to them, maybe I need to get a divorce. But then the honeymoon stage come in, and I usually tell people they didn't sign up for the honeymoon stage, right? They didn't sign up. That's the abuser's tactic. I'm sorry, I will never do it again. They probably try to buy them gifts. They probably promise to go to therapy or something like that. Let's do couples counseling, which I tell people does not work. That's another podcast for another time. But that's the tactic that I noticed, which is a very manipulative tactic, right? Including the gaslighting. Right, including the isolation, the minimizing, the denying, and the blaming the victim's experiences. And what happens is that, the victim might start to have what I call the false hope, right? And they try to reason with them. They probably have this idea they'll change. I'm going to help them change. But no matter what they do, they go right back to that tension building stage, and that cycle just continues. But then later on, in 1984, the Power and Control came about. And this was created by the Domestic Abuse Intervention Program. Now, what I like with their wheel, it doesn't just talk about the cycle, it talks about the tactics of the abuser. And again, through their research, they utilize survivors of abuse to make sure they capture their lived experiences. Like, they wanted the facts. And what they found is that through the Power and Control wheel, which is broken down typically in 8 parts, it showed a whole bunch of psychological abuse. Remember, I told y'all, like, it for some people it's never gotten physical.
Yeah.
Right? It no matter what, it always starts with psychological. And in the tactics of an abuser, what you see is the isolation, isolating them from their family members, their friends, their place of work, things that they love, controlling who they see, controlling who they talk to, controlling what they wear, right? And there's minimizing and denying and blaming, right? Or the gaslighting or the Darvo effect, deny, attack, and reverse the roles of the victim and offender. Well, all of a sudden the victim is questioning their reality, right? They feel like they're going insane, right? They feel like what they just experienced actually didn't happen because sometimes the abuser is that good at psychologically manipulating them. Using children, if children is involved, right? Maybe trying to turn the kids against that parent, right? Or against that family member, maybe utilizing the kids as threats, like, if you try to leave, I'm going to take the kids away, you're never going to see them again, I'm going to make sure the kids hate you, which unfortunately does happen because the abusers start engaging in that smear campaign. They're not looking at the impact it has on the children. Their goal is just to continue to hurt the victim. Then there's the economic abuse that's in there. There's the coercion and the threats that's in there. So all of these are some tactics that a lot of abusers utilize within a power and control setting, because again, their goal is to maintain some sort of power and control, remove their independence, lower their self-esteem, and make them think they can't live independently without them.
Yeah, those are a lot of terminology that you're using in that they're hot buttons, right? Like you see that on social media all the time, like this person's gaslighting me, or when does it become abuse versus just maybe normal, like, bad relationships?
Right, bad communication versus they're doing this on purpose to exert power.
Right.
Exactly. See, I see that terminology a lot, gaslighting. Some people do use it wrong. Remember, abuse is this repeated cycle. It's a repeated cycle of pattern that continues to happen. Like, for example, let's say a couple is talking and one partner felt as though, like, they felt like they were being gaslighted in the situation. All right. In what ways did you feel like you were being gaslighted? However, when the other party who was healthy, like let's say they're a healthy person, didn't realize that they were doing what they were doing, they will take accountability and try their best to not do it again, right? When it comes to an abusive relationship, the whole gaslighting situation is literally psychological manipulation, and it repeatedly happens. to the point where it literally affects the victim's mental state. I've seen some of the worst of worst, I tell you.
I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
Because the long-term effects of that, of being told over and over, you're making this story up, it never happened. And something that we have seen before is that, people who want that power, that, call them the abusers, that they can be very charming, especially to other people.
Yeah.
So you could have family members being like, what are you talking about? He's so nice. He came to Christmas and he brought me all this stuff.
Yes.
And meanwhile, the victim is sitting there like, this person is doing all this stuff to me, but they might get to the other family members or the other friends before that person can. So I'm sure you probably see that all the time.
I see that very, very often. And sometimes the victim will start to think, should I view them how everybody else is viewing them?
Yeah.
Right? Because out in public, they're very charming. But then behind closed doors, there you go, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde.
Yeah. So how much of that starts to feel like your own fault? Because if they can be nice to everyone else and they can be charming to everyone else, what is it about me that makes them explode? Why am I causing this? How do you start to undo that with victims?
The education piece as well, because a lot of them don't even realize what's happening. So educating them on, power and control, gaslighting, cycle of violence, trauma bonding, all those terminologies, and also listing the examples of what they have experienced and kind of tie it back to that, this is your story. Your heart knows your truth. This is what really happened, right? It may take a while, though. It may take a while for them to come to terms with that they're in an abusive relationship. Just because the victims are coming to me for counseling doesn't mean that they are they're not ready to say, I'm in an abusive relationship or in an abusive family dynamic, right? So a lot of time it's just like continuing to have that conversation and utilizing different, therapeutic interventions to help them get to that point. The most we can do as therapists, honestly, is plant the seed and hoping that they water it. Because I always remind myself, if they're actively still with the abuser, after our therapy session, they go back home to that. A lot may happen when they go back home to that.
Do you ever see that where therapy becomes a big problem? Because I imagine a lot of abusers actively do not want their partners even in therapy, right?
Oh,
yeah,
absolutely not. It is encouraged for their safety, if they can, to not say that they're in therapy. I've had some tell me, they don't know I'm here. I said, that's great. Especially working in domestic violence agency, to the point, and it's part of their safety, they'll come up with a lie as to where they were. It's part of their safety. I have dealt with people that said, I feel like I'm lying, I feel guilty, but then at the same time, they're like, I'm trying to stay alive here. This is why I'm doing this.
Protect yourself.
So let's talk about that a little bit. You have somebody who's in an abusive relationship. I imagine if they're in therapy and they've gotten to the point where maybe they want to get out of it, right? Because not every time they want to get out, they have to hit that point.
Yes.
So somebody gets to that point where they want to exit the relationship. What happens, and how do you help that person, navigate that scenario?
Ooh, leaving is the most dangerous time.
Yeah.
You gotta keep that in mind. Leaving is the most dangerous time. I hear people say it, but not enough. Lately in New Jersey, I'm sure y'all seen on the news, there has been a lot of intimate partner homicide happening. Not just in Jersey, but nationwide. And there has been a lot of murder-suicide happening. And a lot of times when I do some research as to what happened, I would hear that, the victim was trying to leave, or they recognized the abuse was happening and they started catching on to the abuser, unfortunately. So every case that I work with is very unique. That's the thing. Very unique. Safety planning should be the top most important thing in a therapy session when it comes to working with survivors of abuse, especially those that are actively in the relationship or dealing with that family dynamic and they want to leave. They tell me they want to leave. We got to go through some intense safety planning. But it's really based on getting to know, the client that you're working with as well. Because again, every case that I work with is very, very unique. So depending on their situation, the safety planning might be, okay, sometimes they'll find trackers in their car and their phone. We got to talk about how to do safety planning with that. If children is involved, we have to do safety planning with children. If you have family members that are very involved, we got safety plan with them too because they're a threat, right? If you're working, we got safety plan with that. If you want to get a restraining order, we got a safety plan with that. what's important, providing them with a lot of different resources that's available to them as well, because they need community. Because if you notice, the victims, when they start speaking up and they become the survivor, they get isolation. Abusers tend to get community, and that's what they need, community. So providing them the different professional resources and always following up with them in regards to the resources, giving them that safe space or safe place to process through the trauma. Because remember, sometimes they go through life feeling like they blame themselves for what's happening, and some of them feel as though that when they talk about it, people shame them, guilt trip them, call them liars, started making excuses for the abuser. So first things first is creating that safe space and letting them know, I hear what you're saying, I believe in what you're saying, and your heart knows your truth. So just to answer your question, definitely safety planning is like the most important thing, but getting to know them in regards of how can I create a good safety plan for you, an interactive safety planning to protect you.
And you mentioned kids being involved, which unfortunately happens a lot. How often are the kids also a part of the actual abuse versus they're kind of on the peripheral of it? Or is there any way to actually separate if their parent is in this situation, like you're in this situation too?
And a lot of people forget that the kids are heavily impacted, right? Teenagers as well, young adults, all of them. So in the United States, 12 million people are survivors of abuse, or victims of abuse, I should say. And
that's a lot, yeah.
That I know that is a lot. 2 years ago it was 10 million and went up to 12 million.
Wow.
And that also includes, again, a psychological, physical, sexual harassment, stalking. 15 million children are exposed to the abuse.
Wow.
And more than half of those children that are exposed to the abuse are actually also being abused by the abuser, right? So what happens with the children is that they are at increased risk of becoming abusers themselves, or actually being the victim of abusive relationships, because they tend to stick to what they know, right? But it also has a heavy impact on their mental health. I've seen increased risk of suicidal ideations, increased risk of cutting, behavioral concerns, depression, anxiety, PTSD. Maybe later on in life, unfortunately, like a personality disorders like start to develop and stuff like that, conduct disorder and stuff like that starts to develop. So a lot of times people forget how it impacts the children who are exposing it. And I've seen cases where, things had to go to trial, right? Because it got that bad. And then kids had to be involved in that. Kids had to do like a testimony or something like that. That's hard for them.
That's so
it's
traumatic.
very impactful.
Terrifying, yeah, right.
Right? Yeah, and they go to school. Some of them probably won't be able to focus in school because they're being exposed to the abuse that's happening in their home. And I always remind people, children, they eventually become adults.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I work with adults.
Yeah.
I cannot tell you how many times the adults, as you already know, they often bring up something that happened during their childhood.
Yep.
And a lot of victims of domestic violence, like intimate partner violence, I should say, a lot of them have told me they grew up in a household where abuse was very present, or they were being abused, or they were exposed to it, and it was normal to them.
Yeah.
So a lot of the time you're seeing in the adults that are in abusive situations that they have some kind of historic experience with that themselves.
Yeah, it's something even when we do couples counseling, one of the first things you go over is, what is your family of origin? What were the relationships like that you were around? What were your parents' relationships like? Because even if they're in a healthy relationship now, it's, what skills are you still taking from there? Or unfortunately, individuals who are like, I keep getting into these toxic relationships and I don't know why. And we peel back the layers and it's like, look what you grew up with. This is what you thought was normal. And even if you're an adult and you can look back and say, okay, well, like that wasn't okay that happened, it doesn't mean you can magically undo all of it. It still impacts you. It still affects you.
It does.
Speaking of couples counseling, I know like a lot of couples in an abusive scenario want to try to lean on couples counseling. You had mentioned very clearly your opinion on that, about it not, being that effective in these situations. Can you speak to that a little bit, of why it doesn't work?
Oh my goodness. So I was always taught that if you're doing couples counseling and you find out that there's IPV happening, intimate partner violence, ethically you should end it. Because how we're going to reach our therapeutic goals if there's abuse happening.
Yeah.
The abuser will have to stop. Right? Sorry to laugh at that.
Yeah.
Rare that they do, right? And all of it's not safe. It is
Yeah.
not safe for the other partner who's the victim of the abuse that's happening, but it's also not safe for the therapist either, right? So they're supposed to end it. That's something I was always taught. Legally,
Yeah.
ethically, the couples therapist is supposed to end it and probably provide, appropriate individual referrals, right? And also, what happens in couples counseling as well, if there's domestic violence happening in the relationship, the victim might be too afraid to speak up. The victim might be too afraid to actually address the abuse that's happening in the relationship. So how are we going to reach some goals in therapy?
Yeah.
How's this treatment going to work?
And God forbid they do say something. What are the ramifications of
Once
that?
that
later?
session's over,
Exactly.
yeah, right.
I know, because I said, depending on their living situation, they go back home to each other. The therapist's not going home with them.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
A lot may happen. And I've worked with clients who told me that couples there, it did not go well. The abuse escalated when they got home on a
Yeah.
car ride home. Some felt as though that the therapist chose the abuser's side too, and that can happen if the therapist doesn't have
'Cause you don't
awareness
know.
The
of
information, yeah.
right? Or if they don't realize that the abuse is happening. And that actually steers that survivor away from actually seeking individual treatment, because they're thinking like, well, then if this couple's therapist chose their side or made excuses for them, then what therapist is going to listen to me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's just going to keep happening. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
I know sometimes like even like regular couples counseling like can get very intense, right?
can.
And sometimes like we think about all of the sessions that are happening in modern therapy, and sometimes I wonder how many fights occur at, like that modern therapy has caused, right?
Sometimes it gets worse before it gets better.
Sometimes it's worse before it's
I
better.
hear you. But that's the thing. Couples argue. Couples fight. Again, with domestic violence, it's a repeated,
Yes.
pattern, repeated cycle to maintain power and control.
Yeah.
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 I think like one of the very difficult parts of domestic violence is being the third party, right? Of like not being in the relationship, but like seeing it. Maybe you're a parent, maybe you're a child, a daughter, a son, and you see what's going on, and like you just are faced with, how do I address this? So can you speak to that a little bit?
You mean when like the outside person is looking
Yeah.
at their loved one who's getting
Yeah, maybe they don't know what to do. Like,
maybe they don't know what to do. First things first, hard pill to swallow. You can't rescue them. You can't rescue them. And a lot of people don't like to hear the word abuse. They don't want to hear that they're in an abusive relationship or an abusive dynamic. That kind of might push them away. For the most part, I have received phone calls from the survivors or the victims, family members or friends. I have, because they were concerned, right? And again, the most I will tell them, unfortunately, we cannot rescue them, but also asking them if they want therapy, because it takes an emotional toll and impact on them. A lot of
Yeah.
people don't realize that the loved ones on the outside are heavily impacted by it as well. Especially the victim there's a history of going to the loved ones to talk about it. Maybe at some point leaving the abuser, moving in to that loved one to go back to the abuser. It has an emotional toll and an impact on the loved one. They're scared. Right? They're really scared of something terrible happening, but also they become a target for the abuser as well. Right? So usually letting them know, unfortunately, you cannot rescue them, right? You have talking to them. You cannot force them to see it. You definitely don't want to push them away, but you want to let them know that I'm here if anything. You got to set strong boundaries, because believe this, abusers' number one tactic is isolation, right? When they feel like they can't isolate their victim from their loved ones, that loved one becomes a heavy target. And I've seen some scary cases, some really scary cases.
So you have to protect yourself in that situation.
You got to.
But being that person, hey, I'm here if you need it. But that's so
it.
challenging. If someone's coming to you and disclosing all this stuff about their spouse, and then they're just going back home to them, that you have to feel so out of control in that moment. Of like,
Yeah.
I can't really do anything here.
You can't.
That's
you
so
just
tough.
speak to them, but
Yeah.
you got to protect your peace as well. You got to have some strong boundaries with them as well. And you have to, I usually tell like the loved ones, ask yourself, let's say the victim comes back to you in the future, and this time they're serious, they're done. Ask yourself, what's your role in that moment? Do you want to get involved or not? Right? But protect yourself at all costs, because a lot of people don't realize the support system are such a target. Such a target for the abuser. You've seen cases where, again, I said murder-suicides tend to happen. There was one in South Jersey where the ex-husband, not only did he kill her, his ex-wife, but he also killed her parents, because she had moved back home with her parents, right? And there is a lot of domestic violence films or series out there, which I'm so proud they're out there now. I know they're triggering, but it's bringing more awareness.
Yeah.
Dirty John is a very popular one, right, on Netflix, if y'all haven't seen it. The John Meehan story. Oh, it's a true story. Deborah, I forgot her last name, but she was the survivor in the story. She was based off in California, doing her thing, made all this money, had 3 or 4 adult children. She's been married and divorced several times. She met John online, and one of her daughters did not like him. When she first met him, she's like, Ma, no. Right? Because you know what happens when you're not in the relationship, you're the person on the outside looking in. You see the red flags first, right? Her daughter did not like him. Her son did not like him. The nephew started to get suspicious. The younger daughter started to get suspicious. So he was a mess. He was definitely utilized all the tactics of abuse. He was very scary. He did some of the most bizarre things, but there was a lot of trauma bonding happening in that relationship. However, once Debbie, there's a history leaving, going back, but once she was officially done, he went after her family. Her one daughter, the one that didn't like him from the beginning, lost her job.
Wow.
Right? Because he was harassing her through her job. And then the youngest daughter, he tried to kill her in broad daylight. She was walking into her apartment complex with her dog, and he attacked her from behind with a knife. She fought him off and killed him out of self-defense.
Wow.
Yes. This was a couple years ago.
Wow.
And her mother have been on Dr. Phil. There's a Netflix series on them.
We have to watch that now.
They've been Dirty John. Yes.
Dirty John,
Yes. Do some self-care afterwards, though.
Yeah, I know. Some of those are so heavy to watch.
Yes. And also, they've been on the show Evil Live Here to talk about it. But I do remember seeing an interview with her daughter. She did say this whole thing did put a strain on her relationship with her mother.
Yeah, how could it not?
How could
Because
it
you're
not,
thinking, my parent is going to always protect me and always put me first. But that doesn't always happen in these relationships. And you hear all the time, like, what kind of parent would do that? Just leave him. Just leave him.
Yeah.
But as you went over all these reasons, it's not always that easy.
It's really not that easy. And, of course, who would have thought he would have went after her
Of
children?
course.
Yeah.
The way that he did.
So when you talk about, like, what does setting boundaries look like in those scenarios when you're dealing with, like, family members? Like,
definitely physical boundaries. Y'all know there's, like, what they say, 6 different types of boundaries, right? Physical boundaries is very important. I've dealt with family members that were very angry, and they wanted to have a conversation with the abuser. They wanted to fight with the abuser, arguments. I'm like, that's one of the worst things you can do. Because in their mind, they're thinking like, well, I'm protecting my loved one.
That's so tempting, though, I'm sure,
It's
in those
tempting.
situations.
But I tell people, think about what it might do to your loved one and to you.
Yes.
Okay? Abusers, they don't care. They're going to do what they want to do. They don't have the insight to realize that they're abusers. They lack accountability. They don't care who they hurt, what they do. They want to continue to maintain power and control, right? So physical boundaries is so important. Emotional boundaries as well. I've seen a lot of divisions in families because a family member is in a relationship where domestic violence is present, right? I've seen a lot of divisions. And I usually encourage the family members, if you're not already in therapy, maybe look into that to process through that pain and the grief in therapy as well. There's not too many research on the emotional impact it has on family members or even friends, but there are a little bit of research out there of how it affects them mentally, physically, and emotionally as well. As therapists, we go through compassion fatigue, vicarious trauma, and stuff like that. so do the loved ones.
Yeah.
And a lot of people tend to forget that.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point, is that you have to take care of yourself and you have to protect yourself as well. And then you
Always.
can be there for that person in the future in whatever that
Yes.
capacity might look like for you. But it has to be exhausting to think, okay,
It
today's the
is.
day they're going to leave. Today's the day. And then they don't. Or then they show up with them to a family event and you're like, no, like that
I
wasn't
know.
that wasn't the plan.
Yeah, I think just taking a moment, like, to just pause, and because you do want to, like, if, like, I'm just putting myself in the shoes of someone that is seeing a loved one get abused, and my initial gut reaction would just be like confrontation, like,
Yes.
let me go in there, let me save them, right? But it's much more complicated than that. So I think just like taking that moment of being like, hey, let me think about how is this going to impact my loved one, you know, and myself.
And realizing that you can't rescue them, especially if they're not ready to be helped.
Yeah.
You know,
that's
not-
so hard.
Yeah, it is. It is very hard. Not every case is different, but I hoped the loved ones realize, like, I can't rescue them, and I need to have a safety plan in for myself just as much as they have a safety plan for themselves as well.
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you mentioned before that most abusers don't change. Do some of them? Do they ever change?
Yeah. I've heard the
Should there
numbers are
ever
very
be
small.
should there ever be hope that they are going to change?
Yeah, I mean, you know, there's such a thing called abuse intervention programs for them, you know, to seek long-term treatment for it. However, what happens is that a lot of them lack the accountability, right? And remember, they're good at gaslighting. What people don't realize, they're so good at it because they gaslight themselves first. That's what starts to happen.
Yeah.
So whatever scenario they created, whatever narrative they created, that's it. That's what it was.
That's their reality.
That's it.
There's like some kind of abuser playbook that all of these abusers just read, and they all.
It's like, have this running joke. It's like they all went to the same academy, the
Yeah.
same university.
Yes.
But remember, with the research by Lenore Walker or the research by the Domestic Abuse Intervention Program, the Power and Control, the Cycle of Violence, this is it. These are the tactics of an abuser. It does feel like they all went to school together or something
Yes.
like that. They utilize similar tactics.
And it makes you question, if they're going into treatment, what is the reason behind it? Why are
Yes.
they doing it? And, you know, we always talk about at Modern Therapy, it really takes a special type of therapist to even be
It
able to
does.
work with that population.
It does.
Because if you are triggered by that in some way, if you feel like you cannot be on the same page as that person,
Right.
we will not force you to try to be. Like, we understand
Yes.
that, right? They
Yes.
need a certain type of provider
Yeah.
who's even going to be able to, like, have that first session to even begin with,
Exactly.
because that's a
Exactly.
really challenging population to
It
work
is.
with.
It is. And I shouldn't say none of them can. Some of them can. With,
Yeah.
you know, taking accountability and be willing to take treatment very seriously, and also being paired up with a therapist that has the skills and knowledge and utilize the
Yeah.
effective interventions to provide them with some therapy.
Yeah.
You know, so it's possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think maybe the best way to combat abusive relationships is to avoid getting in them. Like, if we're talking about intimate partners, right? Like, so what are some red flags that people can look for when they're out there dating, of what to look for in potential warning signs?
First of all, trust your intuition. Trust your gut feeling. I cannot tell you how many times I've been told, you know, right early on in the relationship, I noticed red flags. And what were those red flags? And then I get a whole scenario of what happened, and they notice that those red flags continue on throughout their relationships, right? It's a cycle of patterns, right? Also, I know a lot of people talk about the love bombing, right? In the beginning, they want to move very fast. You know, they probably shower you with gifts, right? But also, the number one tactic, or the first tactic they utilize, is the isolation. When they start to isolate you from your loved ones, and they tend to pick on the people that are closest to you. All of a sudden, they don't like that friend or that family member. They don't like your mom, your dad, your brother, your sister, your cousin, or your best friends. And they always have to have some sort of reasons as to why they don't like that person, right? Then next thing you know, control starts to happen. Controlling what you wear, who you see, who you go to, wanting to know all of your whereabouts. That's not cute when such behaviors happen. That is a way to trap you, right? But also trauma bonding. And I know people use that terminology a lot, and they don't use it some people don't use it correctly. I often hear people say, "Oh, I was hanging out with my friend and we trauma bonded. We talked about our traumas. We asked him."
That's a TikTok definition.
I know, like, that's a TikTok definition. So, my hopes is that more people will understand what trauma bonding is, because a lot of times it happens very early on in the relationship. So, the term came out back in 1981 by two psychologists, Donald Dutton and Susan Painter, because they wanted to do a study on the emotional attachment that victims starts to develop with abusers. And it wasn't until 1993 they started to do further research, and the word trauma bonding started to come into play. Some people don't realize that word has been out there forever, because what they found is that trauma bonding develops because when there's negative reinforcement happening or abusive tactics happening in the relationship, and the next day, you know, some positive reinforcement start to come in, like the honeymoon phase that we talked about earlier. That's the trauma bonding. The victim starts to bond with the moments that felt good, right? Or they start to bond with the honeymoon stage. So they start to develop this very strong emotional attachment with the abuser. So that's what trauma bonding is.
And that probably is
That's
the
a red
part
flag.
that they, that's a red flag. That is probably the part that they want to share with the people around them the most. Look
do.
at this trip they took me on. Look at this gift they
Yes.
got me.
Yes.
And they might not be mentioning all the stuff that happened last week because they know the response that they're going to get if they share that. So I'm sure a lot of times when victims start to actually share this stuff with people around them probably like, whoa, where did this
What is
come
going
from?
on?
Like, we didn't even know this was happening.
Exactly. Because then also what starts to happen is that a lot of times the victim is in denial as well. Because y'all know what happens when you get out of the denial stage, right? Once you start to accept what's happening, you come into reality. All these emotions start to come out, and
so
I call it the
overwhelming.
purge. Exactly. And then they have to face, they have to say, like, do I stay or do I go? Right?
Yeah.
And that's a tough decision to make. That's why I
Yeah.
said leaving is the most dangerous
Survival.
time. I usually encourage them, if you want to leave, maybe not say it in the moment. Some people don't make it out alive, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
It's either that happen or the abuser become extremely, extremely nice to them and
Yeah.
try to suck them back in.
Right.
Yeah.
And now when you talk about intimate partner violence, so many people are just thinking immediately it's the husband against the wife. What are the different forms that you see, and how common is it that is the situation?
That is because remember, back in the day with the research, they often will talk about batters woman syndrome,
Yeah.
of course, right? And again, here's that word batters because a lot of people think it's just physical.
Yep.
Now, again, psychological is abuse, and it usually starts with psychological. But nowadays in society, we're starting to see more male victims speak up, right? Whether they're being abused by a male or a female. Yeah. So I hope there's more awareness that it's not only just women that are victims and it's not only women that are victims in intimate partner violence,
Yeah.
males as well. And it also happens a lot in the LGBTQ community. That's something that tends to get ignored a lot. But slowly but surely, I'm starting to see a lot of more male survivors coming
Yeah.
in to treatment.
Yeah, they're talking about it. And when you even mentioned before that with domestic violence, it's not necessarily even, spousal or in relationships. It's all these other relationships that you're in. And people might not put that together, that it could be in the workplace, that it could be with a parent or someone else, because that's not where your mind goes when you think about that topic.
I've seen it all. I've seen adult parent being abused by their elderly parent being abused by their adult child.
Yeah.
Sibling abuse is a big thing too. Abuse within step families, abuse with aunts and uncles, cousins. I've seen it all.
Yeah.
If you could maybe just speak one powerful sentence to someone who's in that position right now, what would you tell them?
A powerful sentence. Let me see.
Not to put you on the spot.
I know. Right. Well, I just want to remind them, your heart knows your truth. And you feel alone, right? But you're not alone. There's so many resources out there. Become familiar with the resources that are available to you, and the resources are confidential. Take advantage of those resources. and you're not crazy. Often when I'm working with survivors, they will tell me, I'm not crazy. No, you're not, because that's how it feels. That's how they feel, especially when the gaslighting comes into play. Gaslighting leaves long-term psychological impact on them, I tell you.
Yeah.
So the main thing I would tell a lot of people in this situation is that your heart knows your truth. You're not alone. You know, take advantage of those resources out there. Document what you need to document. And there's people out there, people like me, people like you guys, who are willing to help. You know, just come find us.
Yeah.
We're here.
I love that.
That's great.
That's beautifully said. So we end every episode with an Am I the Problem, which we pull from Reddit. So these are real people with real scenarios out there.
I read it.
So we are going to read you a scenario, and we kind of already dabbled on this topic, but I'm just curious what your opinion is. So me, 39-year-old female, my best friend, who's a 43-year-old female, is engaged to a male who's a 38-year-old male. They're all between 38 and 43.
Gotcha.
Recently, he's been hiding her keys, making plans without telling her to interfere with time with her friends. For example, she was supposed to come spend the weekend with me and her godson, and he told her he had made an appointment for her to get her plates renewed on a Saturday. So I told her he was being controlling and manipulative, that it's scary to think what else he would do to her or lie about. Now, her fiance, of course, found out what I said because he took her phone while she was napping. She has a lot of physical disabilities, and her mental health is shattered as well due to her physical health taking a toll on her body. He not only confronted me on Facebook due to her physical health taking a toll. Oh, no, sorry. He not only confronted me on Facebook, but used her phone to block me on all her social media, which she found out from another mutual friend and fixed it all. But she says it's just his ADHD and learning disability that causes these issues. I told her I get that, may play a part, but he refuses to get help, gaslights her all the time, and then blames others, aka me, for brainwashing her, and that there's nothing wrong with their relationship. I talked to a coworker about this, and she said that I could be the problem because it's not my place to say anything, and I need to let her learn the hard way or learn from her mistakes. But I think I need to help protect her as her friend because she's tied to him through marriage. So I know we touched on a couple of those topics already, but what is someone calls you with this scenario, what are you telling them?
Oh my goodness. Again, as I said before, you can't rescue them. And I noticed that when she tried to tell her friend, when she used the word manipulation, all that stuff, that could have, steered the friend away because, a lot of times when they're in the relationship, especially early on, and she's planning a wedding, she may be in denial about what's really happening right now because her thought is thinking about the future with this person, maybe thinking about who he can potentially become. And the friend, I understand where the friend is coming from. She cares about her friends. She wants to support her friend. She don't want anything bad to happen to the friend. But that can make things more dangerous for the both of them, right? So always keep that in mind. And all you can do really is just plant the seed. I don't think that friend is the problem. The friend is concerned. She's scared, right? Yeah. Especially if that friend has history of going to her and telling her these things, right? I think sometimes when we're dealing with people that ask us, that tells us about what they're going through, they may not want advice. They probably just want to talk. So the friend has to, think about that. Does she want advice, or does she want me to just listen? But also the friend has the right to set those boundaries. Maybe there's a point the friend doesn't want to hear it anymore. Yeah. She has the right to say it to her, at this moment right now, it takes an emotional toll on me to hear all of this. So please no longer bring this to my attention or something like that, the friend can say. But also the friend should set some strong boundaries because it is impacting her heavily. To the point where she's even bringing it into work.
Right. She's putting it on Reddit.
Yeah. She's putting it on Reddit. Right. But I get her because she is so concerned.
Yes.
Right.
It comes from love.
It does come from love. It comes from love. It comes from fear. But also keep in mind, we see the red flags. Yeah. Before they do, because we're outside of the relationship, right? We're not going through what they call the butterflies or whatever. The friends probably going through.
Yes. And it's interesting because you said you can become also a victim of this person. And as soon as she started saying something, he took the friend's phone and he's blocking her on Facebook. And you see how they can get so entrenched in it.
Exactly. She's probably not invited to the wedding.
Yeah, she's probably not going to be. I don't think she'd be the maid of honor anymore.
No, he's probably going to, because I hear that a lot too. He's probably going to remove her from all of that.
Yeah.
All of that.
to tread lightly. That was so good. It was so informative. You really are the expert in this topic. And how, if someone is listening to this and unfortunately they do resonate with some of the stuff we're talking about, what are some resources out there, maybe specifically in New Jersey, that people can search for?
Oh, the National Domestic Violence Hotline. If you Google it, call that number. It's 24/7.
Amazing.
Right? Call that number. And if you need to go to a domestic violence agency that's local, then they will direct you to the right people or the right agency to speak with. You know, always start
great.
with that. Always
Yeah.
start with that for sure.
Amazing.
Yeah.
This was so informative. Thank you for everything that you do, for
Yes.
all
Thanks for
the
having me.
survivors and victims that you work with. And just like so grateful that there are people out there like you who are doing this work, because it is, you're literally saving lives, and
Yes.
it's incredible.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for having me. Again, I always want to bring awareness into this community, because more understanding needs to be happening when among survivors of abuse. It's,
Yeah.
trust me, a lot of them want out, but it's not easy to get out.
Yeah.
It's really not.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.